And then I'll get onto something else and I'll be like, boop, 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 boop. I'm like, and then I'll think about it, be like, don't think about it, don't think about it. And a boop, 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 boop. It's like compartmentalizing that shit so hard. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Brain Blaze. Settle in, it's a long one. Thank you to Danny who wrote it. Thank you to me who reads it. The easiest and lazy part of the Business Blaze trio, because also we're of course joined by our wonderful editor Sam, who you see the results of, and obviously I don't, because that's how time works. The format of this show, if you're new here, first of all, welcome. Danny has written something for me. I've never read it before. Let's go. I feel as if today was the day I really opened my eyes for the first time. Today was about 3 months ago. Whenever an episode is super long, it'll sit in my recording calendar for like ages, and I'll be like, okay, gotta do it today. I'll do it. I get into it, and then I enjoy it, but just knowing I've got to sit down for like an hour, it's like, oh God, okay, let's go.
How long is this going to take?
Although I now realise that time itself is a lie. I used to be the kind of idiot who blindly accepted proven facts aggressively thrown at me by the mind-controlling mainstream media devil-worshipping scientist, and my so-called accountant who still refuses to acknowledge that he was replaced by a government-sanctioned robot duplicate in 2009. Uh-oh, Danny. Danny, it feels like you're slipping into the territory of schizophrenia in that one. It's like, they've been replaced by... Isn't there a name for that disease? I've made a video about this where people think that their like family members are being replaced by like clones or robots. Or it's like a real mental disorder, and it sounds terrifying. And they'll be like, yeah, no, I know it's a little bit crazy, but they are robots. They are. And like sometimes they kill them. And it's like, that's up because they're not robots, obviously. They're just the person's like, just something's gone wrong in their brain. Super intense. Oh, God. And it could just happen. It's not like you're born with it. It's just like one day you think they've been replaced by robots, which is terrifying, isn't it? Except in the case of my family where they have actually been replaced by robots. That's the one real time. Gonna go home, take care of my robot kids. I was the kind of person who would instinctively dismiss anything that sounded a bit outlandish or drifted away slightly from the official narrative, which had been brainwashing me ever since I was old enough to wear long trousers and absorb a curriculum of lies. Yeah, I remember. Is this an American thing as well? This is such a British thing where it's like, oh, I guess because you don't have school uniforms, right, America? But there's a point where you get to, I'm not sure what age it was, but the young boys at the school wear shorts. And then there's an age you pass, I can't remember what it is, it's probably like 8 or 9, and then they're like, now you get to wear trousers, and you're like, look at me, I'm a big boy. I don't remember what we did in winter. We just cold in winter, because I remember getting trousers to school for the first time, and I felt so grown up. But then what did we do in winter?
I'm freezing my nuts off!
Damn, the cold is making everybody crankier.
I have no time for anyone who alleged that Elvis Presley faked his own death to avoid paying taxes, or the McDonald's have been breeding cattle on the moon since 1992, or that Hitler was really a dolphin genetically engineered by the SSI. Yes, the classic Hitler was a dolphin conspiracy theory. But today, my mind was open and I woke up to the harsh truth of reality. The human race is being spoon-fed a daily diet of misinformation to cover up what's really going on behind the pantomime curtain. And the only people, pantomime, we've talked about this before, and people always get a bit spicy in the comments, being like, oh, Simon, it's just like you not to like pantomime, not being able to enjoy anything in life and just shitting over it. Pantomime is basically shit theatre. So, and I'm of the opinion that theatre is kind of like shit movies. Like, I've talked about this before, and I'll talk about it again, but I like theatre. Like, throughout school, loved acting, loved being on the stage. Like, that was the shit. But I never really enjoyed watching it very much. I love movies. And I always be like, yeah, but theatre was great until we invented movies. Because it's more comfortable, you get to see a close-up of people's faces, they think about it, they edit it. Movies are the evolution of theatre. And pantomime, if you've got like theatre here and movies here, pantomime is in the other room. Like, hanging out with all the dumb people. Pantomime's stupid. Stupid.
Look how stupid he is. I'm tired of you making fun of me.
If you don't know what it is, just Google it. I'm not going to explain it here again. We've already had enough asides. Then the only people brave enough to challenge the global propaganda machine are almost universally dismissed as crackpot conspiracy theorists who should be considered about as credible as marshmallow casserole. I can't say for certain. Yeah, also, what's up with marshmallows and sweet potatoes, Americans? I was watching a show the other day. I'm rewatching a show. Do you guys remember the OC? It was like a show from literally 20 years ago now, which makes me feel super old, because I remember watching that show when I was in school, and those kids were older than me, or about my age. And I was like, oh yeah, they're about my age. And now I rewatch the show. I'm watching it with my wife, who's never seen it. And I'm like, oh my God, I relate to the adult problems much more now. I'm like halfway, I guess, between like the kids and then the adult. No, I'm closer to the adults. And it's like they've got all these adult problems. And I'm like, oh yeah, look at these adult problems. These are real. And I remember back in the day being like, oh yeah, look at all these kid problems. Oh God, what are we talking about? Oh, and there's this scene where they're preparing for like Thanksgiving dinner or whatever. And they're talking about taking like sweet potatoes and putting them with marshmallows. It's like, what the f*** is going on? What is wrong with you?
I wait for this event every year, Mom. Please, Thanksgiving is my favorite. It's my favorite holiday. Everyone knows this.
But I suspect I changed after I stopped drinking the fluoridated water. I can remember that this was a purposeful decision I took about 10 minutes after getting kicked in the head by an angry cow. Danny, what is going on? I'm just absolutely lost in your sauce right now. But whatever the cause, today was the day I switched off the mainstream media and did my own research. Here's what I discovered. Oh, I'm glad we get into it right there, Danny, because we're 6 minutes in, Danny, and I'm aware that, 5 minutes and 50 seconds of that is just me talking about how I hate pantomimes. And I have no follow-up for that, I'm sorry. Let's carry on. Ong's hat. One of the earliest examples of a conspiracy theory taking flight on the internet relates to a little ghost town called Ong's Hat. I discovered there was a town, or like, is it a place or something in America called Medicine Hat? Like, what the fuck's going on? Situated deep in and I know, look, we've got a town called Western Supermare. Like, what the fuck is that about? Like a mare, is that like, it's like a female sheep. So Western Supermare, Western Super Female Sheep. What's going on?
The f*** is he talking about?
Situated deep in the woods of the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. The curious thing about, isn't there a TV show where someone's burying bodies in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey? I feel like I saw that. The curious thing about Ong's Hat is that there's practically nothing there at all. I don't mean that it looks like the shell of an abandoned town. I mean it looks like a relatively small patch of deserted, unspoiled forest, which barely seems worthy of holding a specific name. Yet Ong's Hat still pops up on many modern maps. There's certainly nothing left to indicate that Ong's Hat may once have been a bustling and lively town, which has largely fallen silent in the early 20th century. Is this one of those fake towns? I made a video about this, I think on one of my other channels, where they're just like, map makers, cartographers, if you're feeling fancy. They'd be like, Google Maps or whatever, be like, well, we're putting a lot of effort into making Google Maps, so we're just going to throw in some fake towns. And then if, I was going to say Bing, but I guess they do their own research as well because they're Microsoft. But if like John's Mapping Company comes along and takes like, and this isn't a real John's Mapping Company, please don't sue me, John's Mapping Company, if you actually exist, which you probably do because it's a very generic name. But a just generic mapping company, which also probably exists. And they're like, yeah, let's just copy Google Maps. And then they copy the fake towns. Google are like, yo, we know we copied you. They're like, how? And it's like, because that town doesn't exist, bitch. And then they sue John's Mapping Company into oblivion. And there was very little to suggest there was much there in the 1980s. Ong's Hat was destined to become the secret location of a scientific experiment which culminated in the protagonist making a hasty escape into another dimension. Yeah, that sounds real, doesn't it, Daddy? Is this the one that you actually believe, Dan? You're like, I didn't believe conspiracy theorists until I came across the one about the scientists slipping into another dimension. Like some fucking sliders. So it's a good job we have people looking into this kind of thing on our behalf and digging deeper into the wilderness to uncover the real story behind this mysterious ghost town. Thank God we do, Daddy. What would we do without them? What would we do without, people like Alex Jones and all those here? I don't know, probably live better lives. Alex Jones would probably be a lot less poor. $1 billion in settlements. There's very little known for sure about the origins of the town. Ong was a fairly common name for a 17th century settler. Okay, I don't even know how to pronounce it. That's how uncommon it's become. And I'm just guessing on the pronunciation, it's ONG. And folklore tells of a certain Jacob Ong, who had a bit of a reputation for throwing killer moves on the dance floor at the local taverns and attracting the competing affections of a string of women in the area. When one such woman discovered that Jacob was playing her like a fiddle, she flew into a rage and tossed his hat high up into a pine tree, where it remained stuck for years, inspiring the name for the town that grew around it. There was... This is a boring... aside that I'm going to tell anyway because I already got into it. There was a balloon stuck in a tree outside my apartment for years.
Bing, 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 bong, 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 bong. Get those lights off. Bing, 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 bing.
And then one day, woke up and it wasn't there. Thanks, Simon. You're really entertaining. You're doing wonders for your viewer retention right now, telling that balloon story that literally nobody gives a shit about. Variations of the tale suggest that Jacob later opened his own tavern after the very same hat, which had evolved into a local landmark. By the time the writer Henry Charlton Beck took a look around Ong's hat in 1936 during research for his book Forgotten Towns of Southern New Jersey, sounds like an absolutely riveting read there. The place had already been largely consumed by the wilderness. The last time it ever generated much attention was in the early 20th century, when the last handful of remaining residents became involved in unsolved murder cases and suspicious disappearances. But Henry was keen to explore the long history of that forgotten town for his book, and he conducted interviews with a group of people scattered around southern New Jersey. People bought this book. I guess this sort of sells, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, forgotten towns. And it's like, but it just sounds boring. It's like, why was it forgotten? Because it was boring. Like, interesting is not forgotten. It's written down and repeated. God damn.
Daddy, chill.
The subsequent book revealed that Ong's hat used to be a boisterous and rowdy town back in the good old days. It was something of a social hotspot for the rough folk, the historical equivalents of the kind of town where you would today expect to find a half-decent kebab house, a lap dancing club, and a brawl in a car park between two drunkards who've forgotten what they were even meant to be arguing about. Yeah, I can imagine this town. It's like any one of, like, you go, I don't know, not my historical reference, UK. You just be on a drive and you'll drive through some town, and it's kind of just looks rough. There's like rough looking houses. There's like gardens that people aren't taking care of. There's weird shit on the gardens. There's like someone's put an oven out there. They just decided not to take to the tip because it didn't fit in their car or whatever. And then you drive through and there's a kebab shop that's closed down and there's another one that's opened up. And there's, I don't know, in my mind there's a DVD rental store, which doesn't make any sense because it's 2023. But you know what I mean. It's like these towns. It's just, the UK's just filled with generic shitty towns like this.
This town's getting too rough for me.
Yet this rambunctious population had gradually dwindled over the years until Ong's hat had become a little more than a desolate, overgrown memory. That is until the 1980s, when a new group of settlers decided to move into the secluded forest. The story of what exactly happened first began to emerge on quite a low-key scale in the very early 1990s via the distribution of pamphlets in the local area, but it appeared to grow bigger and bigger over the next decade as fresh details and sources continued to emerge through other channels, most notably the fledgling internet. I'll keep the story brief. Oh, you will you, Danny? You will you? Partly because Simon's brain might tune out. My brain is already tuned out over what he perceives to be a prolonged venture into fantastical nonsense. Yes, Danny, you're nailing it. And partly because some viewers might find it irritating to be battered over the head so extensively with the truth. Oh, come on. No one watching this is like, this channel's been around for like, what, 4 years? And if you're still watching this channel being like, maybe this is the episode where Simon finally believes in fairies, I've got some news for you. It's not happening, so stop watching. If Simon does believe in fairies, start believing in fairies, you're going to read about it in the news first, because there's going to be substantial articles about it turns out fairies are real. I mean, that's front page news right there. If someone's like, scientists have discovered fairies, you're not going to find out about it on this channel, and that's about it really, isn't it? So until you see that headline news, Simon still doesn't believe in fairies. A former carpet salesman turned mystic scholar. Okay. Mystic scholar is a f***ing oxymoron if I ever heard one, Danny. By the name of Wally Ford. Okay. Snapped up 200 acres of forested land in Ong's hat. Where the f*** does a guy who sells carpets? Oh, this is America. Like 200 acres, that's a big amount of land, but America's also big. Like, weren't you giving away land and back in the day? You were like, yeah, all you got to do is go there, and grow some crops and, I don't know, kick out some native people and we'll give it to you for free. We'll give you their land for free, settlers. What's up with that? It's like, it's so big, you cannot give it away. So he landed in Ong's hat and he set up the Moorish Science Ashram. I feel like Science Ashram is also like oxymoronic somehow, and I'm not even entirely sure what an ashram is. This was intended to be a ramshackle safe haven where spiritualists, mystics, social outcasts, discredited scientists, hippies, and Yoko Ono fans could convene could convene to explore the untapped powers of the mind while sharing makeshift huts, raising chickens, growing lentils. Where the do lentils? I like lentils. Lentils are like healthy. I used to have this lunch. I'd just be like, I need a healthy lunch, good amount of protein, not much else. So I'd make lentils. I decided lentils tasted boring, so I bought some MSG spices, that monosodium glutamate. Just sprinkle that on top. That tasted so good. And I didn't realize, I was just like, wow, this spice mix is amazing. And then one day I look on the back and I discover it's 70% MSG, and I'm like, oh, that's why. And the problem is when you get really into MSG, you want MSG on everything. I had to wean myself off of that because I'd be like, having dinner, yeah, it's this delicious meal with subtle flavors. Yeah, crack out the MSG spice mix and I'll just sprinkle it on top because you have to have it because it just makes everything taste better. And now I try to avoid it, not because I believe it's bad for you. I don't believe that at all. Just because once you have it, you just want to eat it. And now a friend of mine's like, dude, have you heard of MSG? And I'm like, oh no, you've fallen in the MSG hole. You have to get off it. Nothing ever tastes good again. You go to restaurants and you be like, there's not enough MSG on this delicious meal.
So good and tasty.
That brings us back to the important point of where the do lentils come from. For some reason, I imagine them growing like rice in rice fields. Well, that's probably not correct, is it? The membership included two former Princeton physicists called Frank and Althea Dobbs. It really did. God, that kind of brings a bit of like shame to Princeton, doesn't it? Because you think they'd be training real physicists who are a little bit beyond like the woo-woo shit and going off to live in the woods with some guy who thinks he's what was it, like a scientific ashram? Come on. They'd just been booted out of the academy for attempting to submit a thesis rooted in cognitive chaos, the theory that simple thought patterns can control matter, do cool magic trick, and unlock the hidden secrets of the universe. Princeton? Really? I've heard of Princeton. I know, and in a good way, not like University of Phoenix. That's the internet one, right? Sorry if University of Phoenix is a real thing. So,
apology denied.
One time I was sitting on a university and people were like, Simon, that's actually one of the good ones. I can't remember what it was. For some reason I thought it was bad and people were like, this is a really good university. It's like top 10. And I'm like, for fuck's sake, America. Look, but, Princeton I know. Princeton I knows, is that where that movie Social Network is set? Is that Princeton or is that MIT? Where did Mark Zuckerberg? It was Princeton. No, Harvard. He went to Harvard. That's another big brain one. Oh my God, enough, Simon. We know Princeton is a big brain university, but now I'm wondering. They're like, they're scientists there are just like looking at coasters and being like, come on, change. Doesn't work. Fascinating tangent, Simon. Let's carry on. The Dobbs siblings continued their esoteric experiments at the ashram and involved the rest of the community in their new mission to train the human mind to manipulate quantum physics. Oh, please. They eventually constructed a series of interdimensional vessels called eggs, which operated in a similar way to sensory deprivation chambers, but with a special bonus function. After one young volunteer climbed inside an egg, the whole vessel disappeared for 7 minutes before it finally rematerialized with the volunteer still intact, and he brought intriguing news over from his strange journey. He had traveled to a glorious parallel version of Earth, which was almost identical to our own, but it was completely uninhabited and didn't boast so much as a single branch of Taco Bell. You'd be like, yeah, it's paradise, except when you want Taco Bell or running water or, I don't know, anything that we've built. Like, look at the world. I know there's lots wrong with it, but if someone dumped you in the forest in the middle of nowhere, you'd be like, oh, fuck, for fuck's sake. I just wish I had the problems that I deal with every day rather than the problems of, am I going to get cholera from drinking this fucking water that a deer is shit in? The ashram had stumbled upon a gateway to an alternative dimension in which the concept of queuing had yet to be invented. However, the ashram was then, for fuck's sake, queuing drives me potty. Like, I like queuing. Queuing is something, it's an established way of, waiting in line, I think is what Americans queue it, to get your products. And I live in Prague, Czech Republic. They've got this down. Like, it's just like the UK. You go, people queue. Except for this one fucking store called Paul, which is this French bakery, and they make fantastic pastries. But every branch of this, they have no queuing system. You just go in, there's like 3 tills, and it's like a free-for-all of people who want donuts. And you're like, I was standing, where am I supposed to go? Put a sign up that says queue starts here, Paul, for sake, whoever you are. Paul. However you say it in French. Get that sorted. It's embarrassing. to the French. I mean, you should be ashamed.
Do I need to call you a wambulance?
Wah, 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 wah.
Oh my God. I'm not playing this up. I'm genuine. Sometimes I've just been there and it's like someone's walked in front of me and I'm like, I was queuing there. And I haven't said that because I'm British. I'd never confront anybody. But they're not doing it. They don't think they're doing anything wrong. They just must think I'm queuing somewhere else. It's not, they're not being a dick. They're just like, I don't know what's going on either. Was it? Hello. Oh God, it drives me absolutely potty. I just want a baguette, or they've recently introduced a pastrami sandwich, which is fire. I just want my food. I'm sorry. We'll get back to the video about stupid ashrams and shit. Just had to get that off my chest. It drives me potty.
75 years later.
However, the ashram was then stormed by a shadow military force who didn't seem to appreciate the concept of a portal into another dimension and turned Ongsat into a bloodbath. Good. But the few surviving members, oh come on, how did they they're shitting in the woods. How are they going to survive an incursion by the military? They'd all be dead. And it'd be for the better. Especially those Princeton guys. Idiots. But a few surviving members managed to escape through the eggs and now live most of their lives in the parallel Earth, only returning occasionally to stock up on fresh supplies. Like Taco Bell, and presumably grab a few microwavable pizza pockets from the nearest 24-hour service station. Ongsat has fallen largely silent ever since, save for the echoes seeping in from another reality. I'm not sure if enough of this was brief, if this was quite brief enough, Danny. We're 21 minutes in. The answer's no, Danny, it's not. It's just nonsensical nonsense, Danny. And stories about the French bakery Paul thrown in there because apparently this video wasn't long enough already.
I don't know how much longer I can hold this.
I'm just hoping that some of the chickens got out okay. The intriguing thing about this story is that the more you dig into it online over the years, the more compelling the source material you uncover, which was exciting stuff for the dedicated or extremely bored conspiracy theorists. It was like peeling an interdimensional onion. I bet there's a huge correlation between unemployment and belief in conspiracy theories, right? What began as fragments of stories in cheap pamphlets later expanded into early online bulletin boards and CD-ROMs. Fancy, and other various online mediums. By the end of the millennium, an ever-growing archive of documents and source references were available on the internet as the secret experiments at Ongsat became a topic of frenzied discussion on forums and blog sites. Witnesses were even coming forward claiming that they'd grown up in the ashram but had been instructed to flee by their parents before the military descended and everyone disappeared. Yeah, that sounds real. But what was the real secret of Ongsat? Joseph Matheny is a writer and transmedia artist who was part of an ever-changing collective of artists who concocted the saga of Ongsat. He did? What a surprise that this isn't real. I thought it was real. Oh, wait. So this was totally not real at all. Then those Princeton scientists were never real either. And Princeton's reputation remains intact. Congratulations, Princeton. I bet you were just waiting for my seal of approval. It was a very early version of what we might now call an alternate reality game. After the story first made its debut as speculative fiction in an issue of Edge Detector magazine, Joseph and his buddies continued to develop the story over the course of the next decade, dishing out pamphlets and adding new documents to an online library of supposedly found material, which became collectively known as the Incarnabula Papers. These documents were downloaded over 2 million times. I'd like to think that the majority of players were in on the joke. There were certainly enough clues. For example, an online interview with those supposed ashram survivors was accompanied by a photograph of them which actually depicted the cast members of the cheesy 1970s sitcom, The Partridge Family. I've heard of The Partridge Family for some reason. Never seen it, don't know anything about it, but I've heard of it. But Joseph eventually wrapped up the project in 2001 after he began to fear that some people were taking it too seriously and the saga was being hijacked to provide more ammunition for wider and more dangerous conspiracy theories. Shortly afterwards, he lamented Ongsat became a teeth-grinding obsession for a pathetic few and a fun run for an intelligent and vast majority. You gotta be really dumb to be like, yeah, I know, I believe in the game. It's like someone who finishes Monopoly and it's like, yes, I'm rich. It's like, it's just a game for sake. That may have been understating the case, though. Other people have suggested that around half of the people who engaged in the myth of Ongsat were not aware that half? Are you smoking crack? I didn't even know it was a... Come on, use your tiny brains. Just a little bit. I know they're tiny, but you should know this. And many of them even refused to accept the author's admission that it was a hoax, believing that this was just another layer of conspiracy in which they'd become so emotionally invested. Oh, for fuck's sake. But could it be the case that the whole history of Ong's Hat was little more than myth and it may have never been a town at all? The writer Henry Charlton Beck admitted in 1944 that he believed he had fallen for elaborate traps when researching his book. He had been taken for a ride by the locals of southern New Jersey who had been misleading him on the history of the ghost town for shits and giggles. In legends.
A crushing blow? Yes. Will I get over it? No.
Descendants of the first Ong settlers came to the New York Times in 1968 that, in fact, your Ong's Hat is a corruption of the true name Ong's Hut. The original Ong family apparently lived in the nearby Little Egg Harbor in the early 17th century, and they would transport their grain to Burlington in New Jersey for grinding. It was a pretty epic walk, and so they built a little hut at the halfway point where they could rest overnight. So rather than being a bustling and lively town full of taverns, and kebab houses, Ong's Hat may never have been anything more than a little hut in the forest. Shocking, we know. What they don't tell you is that Ong's Hut was almost certainly a portal to another dimension. I mean, it no longer exists, so draw your own conclusions as to how it mysteriously disappeared at some point over the last 400 years. It never existed, Danny! And I know Danny's joking, but just in case any of you are confused out there in the audience, because, well, quite a few people watch this channel, and some of you statistically have tiny brains. It's not real. Don't think it's real. It's just a game. Okay, tiny brain friends? Let's carry on. Don't worry, you've got big brain me to help you out. The secret treasures of Mount Rushmore. Imagine they had something big that you wanted to hide in your pants. Just joking. Don't know why that goes. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Be good if today's video was sponsored by Sheath Underwear, wasn't it? Let's say the Ark of the Covenant, the crown jewels of Ireland, a treasure chest of Nazi gold, or a set of IKEA instructions that are perfectly comprehensible on first glance. Steady on, Danny. I think IKEA instructions are bloody good. Like, I bought like something from some other website, some piece of furniture, and it came, and it was like 2 pages long, and I was like, this is going to be a breeze. And then you look at the 2 pages, and they're insanely complicated. It's like this giant, you know, like when you see those like cool pictures of like exploded things, where they explode like the car and all the wheels are here and the engine and all its parts like drawn out like that. It was like that, except for a cupboard that I had to put together. And I'm like, and half of it was like, it was barely comprehensible English. And I was like, this is going to be a nightmare. Whereas IKEA, it's like, it's designed for all the statistically small brains people out there. It's like, it's not hard to do. Wait, does Danny have a small brain? He can't have a small, he's got a big brain. Danny, IKEA is easy. Come on now.
Well, I can't read.
Get out of here!
Where would be the safest place to stash your valuable loot? Only one place springs to my mind. Yes, you know I'm talking about the frontal lobe of President Abraham Lincoln's brain, obviously. I mean the 60-foot carving of Lincoln that appears alongside fellow presidents Theodore Roosevelt, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson, sculpted into Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills of Keystone, South Dakota. Legend has it. Oh, that tasted rough. Oh, I didn't have any breakfast today, and that just tasted like multivitamin pill. Anyone else have that? Oh, that is a rough taste. You know how multivitamin pills smell? That's how my burp just tasted. Oh, should have had breakfast.
You're ugly, you're disgusting, I'm gonna kill you.
Legend has it that there's a secret chamber hidden directly behind Lincoln's head, which contains all the hidden secrets and documents and unsavory evidence that the American government doesn't want you to see. You know the kind of thing I'm talking about. Classified government secrets, the corpses of dissected alien bodies, pieces of wood lifted from Ong's interdimensional hut, Donald Trump's tax returns. But I was surprised to learn that this legend is completely true. Well, not the bits about classified secret documents and dissected alien bodies, obviously, but there really is a hidden chamber behind Lincoln's carved head to which nobody is allowed access, and it was always intended to be part of the original design. But what are they hiding in there? What's really going on inside President Lincoln's head? Nothing. Isn't there like a museum in there? Didn't they want to build like a big museum like round the back of Mount Rushmore? And then they didn't. Or maybe they did. There's a room in there, but there's nothing in there. It's not exciting. There's no dead alien bodies. The Mount Rushmore construction took 14 years to complete between 1927 and 1941, but it had taken a while for everyone to agree on what they were supposed to be constructing, and there would be several budget-driven tweaks to the design along the way. The Black Hills of South Dakota were considered sacred by the Lakota Sioux and other Native American tribes, and the land was reserved for them in the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie. Yeah, how'd that go? That didn't go well. There's still like an ongoing legal dispute about this today. But the US government had a sudden change of heart following the discovery of gold in the area. Changed our minds. It was later decided that the confiscated sacred land would be a perfect spot to knock up a monument celebrating the proud history of the United States of America. The irony is rich, guys. You're building like this big thing with all these like white colony-based dudes on their land, my dudes. What the Oh my, and I know it was different back in the day, but it hasn't aged well, has it? Mount Rushmore has not aged well. Well, to be fair, the original idea was to pay tribute to the heroes of the Wild West, such as Lewis and Clark and Buffalo Bill Cody. Wow, that would have been even more inappropriate. This would also have included Lakota leader Crazy Horse, which I'm sure would have thrilled the Native American tribes and made up for everything. Savage, Danny. I kind of liked this heroes theme, though. If a similar project were to be announced today, I think that it would be natural to include Ronald McDonald, Mickey Mouse, Oprah Winfrey, and David Hasselhoff. Let's recarve it. Let's make Mount Rushmore 2. However, when sculptor Gutzon Borglum was brought on board, he suggested that 4 of the greatest US presidents in history would provide a bigger draw for tourists. Perhaps it's a good job that Mount Rushmore wasn't constructed a few years ago, and as I suspect, we may just have ended up with 4 faces of Donald Trump. An early idea was to carve the bodies of the 4 featured presidents from the waist up, but later budget cuts from Congress meant that the sculptor had to make do with just the faces. Another idea was to carve an accompanying written description into the mounting, detailing historical events from 1776 to 1906. Yeah. People really want to go to like a monument in the middle of nowhere and just read. Just like, what's that say on the mountain? It's too small. What does it say? I'm squinting and I still... Stupid idea, idiots. This was scrapped partly because of a last-minute relocation of Jefferson's Head, which meant that there was no longer room for it. Oh, they were going to add the text as well. The faces are more impressive, aren't they? But also because they couldn't figure out how to make the text readable from a distance. Tell you what, how you do that. You make it fucking bigger. You stupid. How stupid were people in the past? How stupid were you, Gutzon?
I'm stupid!
However, Gutzon Borglum was still keen on this idea. His fear was that future generations wouldn't realize what Mount Rushmore was supposed to represent. God, Gutzon, just make it bigger! Instead of 0.11, use like 0.15! God damn it, Gutzon, what you tiny ass brain? And might possibly just assume that the carving was of the 60s pop band The Monkees. In his own words, each succeeding civilization forgets its predecessor. You might as well drop a letter into the world's postal service without an address or signature as to send that carved mounting into history without identification. Yeah. We're all going to forget who f***ing Lincoln was. Look, we know. We dig out some statue in there last Julius Caesar. That was a really long time ago. And honestly... But the people, I know that if we go back far enough, we're like, who was that? Like, we go back to those early ancient Egyptian kings, we're like, we don't know who it is. And the good news is, it doesn't f***ing matter. It's ages ago. It has no importance. History's just not important. We can just forget it all immediately. I mean, the old doesn't matter. Says the man who has made thousands of videos about history and makes his living doing that. We love history. History's important. Don't forget it. Check out my other channels. So this may partly have provided the inspiration for Gutzon Borglum's secret chamber inside Abraham Lincoln's head, which would have been known as the Hall of Records. Oh, I didn't realize it was just inside Abe Lincoln's head. I thought it was like there was behind the whole thing. I've heard of this though. I'm pretty sure I made a video about this. And it would contain all of the most important documents and treasured artifacts from American history. Gutzon's original version was for an 800-foot staircase, which would stretch up from the bottom of the monument to an entrance near the top, which would be adorned by a massive bronze eagle. This would lead into a huge museum containing busts of famous Americans, historical artifacts, and important documents such as the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. By the time we got to 1939, Congress was getting fidgety about the budget again. They were also beginning to feel a little concerned that the elderly master sculptor Gutzon Borglum appeared to be spending all of his time just blasting big holes in the mountain to create his Hall of Records, instead of using his expertise to complete the actual sculptures. With growing concerns over the money running out, along with a quiet concern that the 71-year-old sculptor might drop dead before completing his masterpiece. Oh, he's only 71? I mean, I know that's old, but the president's like 80. You're not concerned about him dropping dead? That video the other day just falls over for no reason. It's like, look, Joe. It's like, bang! Dude. And the guy's like, the last president was like 78. Can't we have young presidents? Like, most people are not that old. Most people are not. They're like, and I know it's like, oh, they're wise and have experience. Yeah, but how about we have someone younger run things? What's wrong with that? Someone who like wasn't born like in the last century. Well, obviously, no, not in the last century, because then there'd be like 23. But like, you get what I mean. Why do we have to have such old people running? Like, how old's Rishi Sunak? Oh, Siri's never going to get it right. So I don't even know why I bother asking. We need like ChatGPT Siri. Although they'll be like, Rishi Sunak was so old in 2021. I'm like, for sake, just try and work it out, ChatGPT, you dumbass. He's not that old, is he? Why? It's just better to have younger people. Like, they're more in touch. They're more progressive. Let's go. And some people are like, oh, I don't like progressive. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but that's how it works. Like, progress goes forwards, not backwards. Jesus Christ, old people. Just take them out when they get to 70. Just take them outside and fucking shoot them.
First with bombs and rockets, destroying their homes, and then when they run helpless into the streets, mowing them down with machine guns.
I'm just joking. Don't do that. I'm not advocating for that. That wouldn't be a platform I would run on. It's not bad, though, is it? I mean, healthcare expenses.
I know these views are unpopular, but I have never courted popularity.
The federal government instructed Gutson to stop pissing about with his secret chamber and finish off the presidential profile. Sadly, the concerns over Gutson's age proved to be accurate. Gutson died just months before the project was deemed completed, and it was left to his young son Lincoln to oversee the final stage of his father's work. However, without the funds or the motivation to complete the Hall of Records, this element of the construction was abandoned. But can you imagine? It's just like his son's a bit shit, and it's like, I don't know how Mount Rushmore is. Like, I mean, I know it looks pretty nice. To be honest, it's quite impressive. But what if the bit that he was like responsible for Roosevelt's chin or whatever, and it's like, it's really, really good, except for Roosevelt's chin, which the sun did. And that's what happens when you're a Nepo baby make Mount Rushmore. I was about to say Mount Everest. What's wrong with you? But the bare bones are still there. The staircase might never have seen the light of day, but behind Abraham Lincoln's head, there's an 18-foot door which leads into a chamber that's 74 feet long and 35 feet tall. Oh, Danny, can't you just use meters? I don't understand how big this is. Or just tell me it's big or it's medium-sized. For the most part, the chamber remained completely empty. Or did it? Conspiracy theorists have speculated for decades that this is where all of the really confidential stuff gets dumped, including fragments of flying saucer, the missing pages of the Bible in which Jesus gets caught bunking off school to steal apples from the Garden of Eden, and the top-secret KFC recipe. It all seems a bit unlikely to me. I can think of easier and more effective ways of hiding important documents than shoving them inside the 60-foot head of a stone monument. Seriously, just invest in a good safe. Yeah, look, the American government and all governments are really good at hiding secrets. There's loads of secrets. I'm sure there are. I've mentioned this before. I always thought, like, if a genie appeared and was like, you have 3 wishes. One of my wishes would definitely be, what's the biggest secret? Like, what is the biggest secret? Just super broad, generic question. I'd be super curious about it, because I bet there's a big secret out there. Right? And then you could get an answer like, guess what? We're living in a simulation. Or it's, you're in the Matrix, God is real. That kind of shit, right? I mean, obviously it's a stupid question because genies aren't real. But that would be a great question to ask if someone was like, you can have the answer to one question. If some omnipotent being came down, it'd be sick.
I'm God. Bingo! Yahtzee!
But we do know that the late Gutzon Borglum's original vision was finally fulfilled on some level in 1998 when 4 generations of his family gathered in the unfinished chamber to witness the laying to rest of 16 porcelain panels engraved with the text of historical documents, including the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. It's the Nepo baby family gathering. The panels were placed inside being a bit harsh. I recently learned about the term Nepo baby, and it's nice. It means like nepotism baby. I don't know why I'm explaining this to people. You can just Google it if you don't know it. Saves me the embarrassment of admitting I didn't know it, but I like the term.
Oh, wow, that is very interesting. Please tell me more.
The panels were placed inside the titanium vault, lowered into the ground of the chamber and sealed with a granite capstone weighing 1,200 pounds. So I'm not sure who's ever going to see them. Not that you'd ever be allowed anywhere near the secret chamber anyway. It's guarded heavily, probably by robots, and completely inaccessible to the public. Makes you wonder what else they're hiding in there. Is it really? Is it really guarded? I mean, it's not guarded by robots. Yet. I'm going to go for the final missing verse of Puff the Magic Dragon, a working model of the ZX Vega Plus, and a dusty film reel containing the footage of the Brain Blaze video on North Korea. Yeah, I'm not releasing that. There's I swear on the subreddit, there's a subreddit, simon.com, no. reddit.com/r/Simon Whistler. And like every month, someone's like, can you release the brain blaze about North Korea? And I'm like, no. And that is not around anymore. And I'm pretty sure, I mean, it's going to be, I'll have an archive version of it somewhere, but no, I'm not releasing it because I don't want to get like fucking VX. It went fuck off the rails like mental. The time cube. Apart from Simon, we all know what it feels like to reach the end of the day where we haven't quite been as productive as we hoped. I know Danny's saying that sarcastically, but I don't know. I'm not a procrastinator. Like, I get to work and I work, and then I work and I work and I work, and I never complete my to-do list. But there is no way that I've gone to work and I've not done a shit load of stuff. It happens every day. At the very least, if I'm feeling unproductive, I'll just record videos all day. Maybe like I'm just not, not really feeling like I could do some creative work or think about, topics or titles or, other shit that I do. I'm just like, cool, I'll just record like 20 videos. I'll just sit down and I'll record for hours. And I find it quite relaxing and enjoyable. It's like the easiest part of my job. Like, this is not hard. This is just like, we're having a good time. We're having a little chit chat, a little jibber jabber. And just drinking way too much coffee. And yeah, no, I do a lot of work. I do a lot of work.
Why you always lying? Oh my God. Stop fucking lying.
I know I've had days where I was hoping to wrap up the latest script only to end up realizing that the clock has struck midnight and I'm still only halfway through the introduction. Yeah, Danny, you're not the only one who bloody realizes that when your introduction goes on for 6 minutes, Danny. Although this video is extremely long. Extremely long. Oh my God, I just looked at how far through I am on the script. I've got this little bar that goes across on the teleprompter. And it's like, God damn, we're going to be here for a while. I just had a little break and made some coffee. Yum, 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 yum. Too much coffee. But imagine how much more deflating it would feel if you hadn't just failed to harness the maximum potential from a full working day. Over the course of 24 hours, you'd actually gone and squandered no less than 4 days. What are you talking about? That's what hobbyist inventor Jean Ray would have you believe. The former electrician insisted that all modern sciences were collaborating in a massive global conspiracy to cover up the fact that 4 days occur simultaneously during a single rotation of the Earth. Dude, what are you talking? You smoked crack this morning? This is the sort of stuff that someone on Joe Rogan's podcast might come on and say. He's probably interviewed this dude, hasn't he? He's like, yeah, that guy seems like he's got his head screwed on, right? Let's interview him. And I mean, I occasionally listen to Joe Rogan and some of it's quite good. But when he gets into the weeds about like, talking about like, what's that one he loves? Where he's like, yeah, once you've taken DMT, you only believe in like aliens and other dimensions. It's like, all right, Joe, it's just your brain playing tricks on you with chemicals, Joe. I'm sorry, Joe, but that's it. That's it. That's what science says, Joe. And he's like, yeah, but I've talked a lot. So it's like, they're not real scientists, Joe. Like this guy. And it's like, but my whole point is like, I feel like this is something people on drugs would say. It's like, dude, time was going so science. Like, it's not. It's just your brain thinking it is. What are we talking about? And he was quite angry about this. In fact, he was positively livid. I'd love to try and explain this in more detail, but Gene made it tricky since he rarely went into explanations that were in any way comprehensible. It's because he's so genius. He's like one of those people who you talk to and they're just so big brain that you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, but everyone says you're correct. You know what I mean? Like people like that, where it's just like that's such giant brains that you're like, look, dude, I'm just gonna have to trust you about radiation from black holes, Stephen, because it's just beyond my remit. And by remit, I mean the size of my brain. Instead, when the self-proclaimed wisest man on Earth launched his primitive webpage in 1997 at the age of nearly 70. Oh, he's dead then. 7, 8, 93, could still be alive. Why are we still talking about him? I hope he's dead. I don't mean that. The other day, I was like, God, it's going to be good when this person dies. And this is, I won't mention who it was, but it's like a prominent figure who's a dickhead. And my wife was like, you shouldn't wish death on people. And I'm like, even this guy? She's like, even that guy. And I'm like, really? I can't wish death on people? Some people deserve death. Wish death. Some people deserve it. They do. And it's not like this person's a murderer. They're just like a politician I don't like. He largely used us as a platform to go on lengthy and unintelligible rants whilst pointing out that you were too stupid to understand his theory. But let's have a go anyway, shall we? From what I can work out, Gene proposes that the Earth rotates with an invisible rotating time cube, and a full day is expressed from each of the 4 quarter rotational positions of the cube. As the Earth rotates through the spinning cube, 4 major time points are created, which are known as sunup, midday, sundown, and midnight. Well, we do have those. So far, so good. All of which are occurring simultaneously. Uh-oh. No, they're not. Time is this thing we call linear, and all of which represent 4 separate days within a single rotation of the Earth. Well, that's like saying, sure, okay. Like, we'll have days that's from 6 a.m. to 12 midday. That's one day. It's not 6 hours, but you could say that. You could say that. It would be weird. You could say it. Doesn't mean you're right. He claimed he invested $250,000 in developing his theory and also alleged that NASA had sent him death threats. Well, you wasted $250,000. Where did you get $250,000 from? You don't sound like the sort of person with the intellectual capacity to get $250,000 together. Unless you bought a house in the 60s and then just lucked into it. I'm kind of curious how the wisest man on Earth, who also described himself as a godlike being with superior intelligence, who has absolute evidence and proof, ended up spending all of his working life as a Sparky. That's an electrician, right? Maybe he was a late developer. Did I mention that Gene Ray was a Florida man? No, you didn't, Danny, but it does provide very important context. He may have claimed to have absolute evidence and proof, but his basic homemade webpage offered very little in the way of substance and was very difficult to follow at any level. I know this was the early days of the internet, but you would at least have expected Gene to try and come up with some kind of structured website with separate pages and categories and stuff. Instead, he went with a different approach. He presented all of his findings as an endless wall of text on a single page which read like a stream of consciousness, presented in fluctuating font sizes and lengthy chunks of angry capitalized sentences, and only very occasional attempts at grammar. It feels like it would be impossible to consume the entire content of the page without experiencing that sensation of your brain attempting to make an emergency evacuation through your earlobe. Oh my god, sometimes I hear about these things and I feel like my brain made that exit a long time ago to save itself. Or it's buried itself deep down inside itself. There's layers of walls. Sometimes I'm reading Casual Criminalist and in a very different way. It's I think my brain has built walls around the horrible shit that goes down there, because I'll be recording an episode and it'll be the most brutal shit. And then I'll be thinking about it afterwards. And then I'll get onto something else and I'll be like, I'm and then I'll think about it, be like, don't think about it. And it's compartmentalizing that shit so hard, because otherwise I just think about children getting killed all the time, which I don't like. Back to Gene's mouse, don't think about it. Gene seemed convinced that his new mathematical model of time is only truth, that Greenwich Mean Time is a conspiracy, and that all modern physics and education is a lie. I'm going to be a brave soul and at least attempt to dip my mental toe into Gene's webpage to try and get more insight into why this is the case. Sam, I really hope there's images of Gene's website on the screen. That must be in the time back machine, right? We can get that. Pull it up, Sam. Let's go.
Drum roll, please.
Here are some of the more decipherable quotes that I've managed to extract from the endless wall of information. Quote, I have so much to teach you, but you ignore me, you evil asses. And academia has retarded your opposite rationale brain to a half-brained slave. Your clock faces are wrong. The USA is on a path to cannibalism. The truth about Santa Claus debunks Santa God. God evolves from Santa. Bro, I'm sorry, you need medicine. I don't know what antipsychotics. What are those called? The ones that keep you if you're the robot aliens are out to get me? Antipsychotics, something like that? There are drugs for this, right? Though you need to be on them. The academia created one day Greenwich time dooms future youth and nature to hell. It is time to kill any educator who does not teach cubism above cubelessness. Kill any educator? Bro, did you go to prison for this? You can't be just saying you can't be calling for death. Oh, I was just calling for death, wasn't I? Uh-oh. Can you do that? Is that okay?
Die, bitch.
It is not immoral for students to kill all educators who ignore nature's harmonic time cube. The difference is, dude, people hopefully can tell that I'm joking, whereas you seem to actually be calling for the deaths of teachers who are teaching. I was on the tram with my daughter. I take her to school in the mornings, and she's like, Dad, what does this mean? And I mean, I'm pointing at my watch. And I mean, that means it's 8 o'clock. And when the big hand gets to the 3 o'clock, that means it's 1:15 and we'll be at school by then. And she's like, thanks, Dad. And I'm like, okay. So I should be killed because I taught her the incorrect time. Okay. I used to believe in circles. What the fuck, Dad? Well, I'm none the wiser, but some people at least seem to latch on to what Gene was proposing. One follower in particular, by the name of Richard Janzarski, seemed to worship the ground that Gene walked upon, but dared to point out that his website and the presentation of the theory perhaps needed a little bit more work. Richard got busy developing an alternate website with Squarespace. No, he didn't, but he should have, which might be more digestible to the ignorant masses as he used a proper website structure and sentences with things like full stops. Yet Gene didn't seem to appreciate the effort, possibly because he couldn't bear the thought of another human being claiming to understand his genius high brain theory.
I don't need friends. They disappoint me.
Master and disciple had a fallout, and later Richard announced the Time Cube, but was claiming that it was just an evil scam, whilst revealing that he had decided to turn to Christianity instead. Why'd you have to turn to anything? Just be like, this is nonsense. And carry on with your day. You don't need to replace it with anything. Just because there's a black hole inside of you, it doesn't mean it needs to be filled. It can just exist there as a big hole of nothingness. Like a psychopath. Although I couldn't find a verified source, it was rumored within the Time Cube community. There was a community. Wasn't it just this dude and the dumb guy who was like, oh, I like that. It was rumored within the Time Cube community that a broken-hearted Richard had shortly afterwards taken his own life by jumping in front of a train. He was certainly never heard of again, but there were other people willing to listen, including, quite bizarrely, the Massachusetts and Georgia Institute of Technology invited Gene to deliver a speech on the Time Cube to lucky students one day in 2002. Well, 4 days in 2002 from Gene's perspective.
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
During the presentation, Gene offered $1,000 reward to anyone who could successfully disprove his theory, but it came with a tricky caveat. You had to convince Gene that he was talking rubbish. The reward went unclaimed. Yes, because people really believe stuff, and it's very hard for them to change their minds. And as I've said many times, it's really good to change your mind. Like, always be willing to, I'm always thinking about, it's hard to change your mind, so I always actively fight against that, being like, it's good to change your mind if there's more evidence presented. And most people don't want to do that, especially when there's a grand on the line. As Mike Hartwell from the main campus observed, even if you could pull that off, Gene is probably broke, and it would require an answer spoken in his brand of spaceman logic. It's difficult to debunk Gene's theory, as it's difficult to fully comprehend what he was actually banging on about. The only point really worth emphasizing is that these four corners of the Time Cube only ever seem to have existed in Gene's head, but I can't help wondering why he was so angry about this conspiracy and why he was advocating the murder of false educators when I can't even see what difference the Time Cube would make to our lives either way. Yeah, he's just dividing up the day into 4. What's this matter? He's off his rocker. Let's just say the world suddenly accepted Gene Ray's Time Cube theory. I mean, what happens next? Will we suddenly be able to squeeze an extra 72 hours into the day? As far as I can make out, it would simply add an extra layer of complication to keeping appointments, celebrating birthdays, producing calendars and diaries, and remembering when you're supposed to take out the garbage. Some have suggested that the whole thing was a wind-up and that the Massachusetts and Georgia Institute of Technology were in on the joke. They definitely were. They were inviting him to speak as a joke. But perhaps it's more likely that Gene, who died in 2015 at the age of 87, oh no, although he might dispute those numbers, became genuinely ill after he retired from his job as an electrician. Genuinely mentally ill. We're not talking about something that killed him. He just lost his marbles. He just went off his rocker. He's, what's that thing where you say it's short of a bunch? Is it bananas? He's one banana short of a bunch? He's one sandwich short of a picnic. He himself noted, "My wisdom so antiquates no knowledge that a psychiatrist examining my behavior knows no course other than to judge me schizophrenic." Oh, so you were judged schizophrenic? Because that I'm not a psychiatrist, but that seems accurate. My favorite summary of the Time Cube theory and of Gene's webpage in particular was served up by a Reddit user who observed, quote, "It's an intelligence test. As you read it, count how many times he says you're stupid. When you decide to stop reading, that number is how stupid you are." Yeah, just don't read it. Stupid.
Well, the Earth is a sphere, though. It's not a cube.
It's composed of 4 quadrant corners. Each corner rotates in 4 different directions simultaneously.
The Titanic. It's hard to think of a less appealing name for a planned new luxury ocean liner than Titanic 2. Didn't some dude, I feel like I read about this years ago. Wasn't there a dude in Australia who wanted to build like Titanic 2? It's not bad. I mean, I know it sank and all that shit, but it's like, It's kind of funny. It's kind of a vibe. At this point, I might be tempted to come up with a comically exaggerated alternative example of a completely inappropriate name for something along the lines of it's a bit like launching X and giving it the name of Y, but I don't think of anything that can trump the truth in this case. All I can say, it's a bit like launching a new ocean liner and giving it the name of Titanic 2. The plans for Titanic 2 were first announced in 2012 by eccentric Australian billionaire. I'm remembering shit from 10 years ago. I'm so big brains. God damn, I really impress myself sometimes. I'm like, yeah, no, I feel like I've heard of this. Australia 10 years ago. And then I'm like, yes. Clive Palmer, who had a bit of a reputation for proposing oddball business ventures, just a couple of years earlier announced an ultimately unsuccessful plan to launch a commercial Zeppelin. That'd be sick, though. I argue for the return of Zeppelins. I think that'd be tight. Like, cruise ships are a thing, right? What if we had like a big Zeppelin that could fly from like Europe to America over the ocean, and it would like be big, and then you'd have a room and stuff, and you'd just be like on a sky cruise? That'd be sick. Why isn't someone doing that? I'd pay a lot of money to go on a sky cruise. I've never been on a boat cruise, which I assume is just filled with old people. So maybe it would also just be filled with old people and be a bit shit. But at least you'd be in the sky. However, we haven't heard much on the planned Titanic 2 since around 2018, so it's possible that the proposal may have sunk before even leaving the port. Ha ha ha! Even if the Titanic 2 were ever to see the light of day, you would hope that it wouldn't endure such a bumpy ride as the original. Unless you've been living at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean for the last 110 years, you'll know that the RMS Titanic, the largest and most luxurious ship afloat at the time, sank on its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York in 1912. It did? After striking an iceberg 4 days into the journey. From the estimated 2,224 people on board, 1,514 lost their lives. At least that was the official narrative. We all know that the 70,000 tons of steel that made up the Titanic was meant to be unsinkable. The captain of the vessel, Edward John Smith, is rumored to have claimed that to his passengers that even God himself couldn't sink this ship. Well, he couldn't because he's not real. So you're bang on, Edward. The vice president of Titanic's operator, White Star Line, was happy to publicly proclaim that the company believed Titanic to be unsinkable, although admittedly when he proclaimed this, he was unaware that the Titanic had already sunk. No, he wasn't. Is that true? That shit's crazy. It's clear to every conspiracy theorist that we can't just pin blame for this tragedy on a random lump of ice, but the problem is figuring out which conspiracy theory we're supposed to believe, as there are just so many of them. The two biggest theories to have gained the most traction over the years relate to a sinister murder plot and an allegation that Titanic never really sank at all. But before we get on to these, here are a few other quick points to consider. The Titanic was built in the Belfast shipyard belonging to Harland & Wolff, and it had been claimed that the Catholic employees within the company knew it was doomed right from day one. This wasn't anything to do with the design or construction, it was simply because the ship's hull number was 390904. This might sound harmless enough, but it is a devilish number when viewed through a mirror. It looks a little bit like the words "No Pope." Oh my god, guys, how far do we have to fucking stretch this shit? It just is so absurd. It's not even funny. It's just absurd. There's no like, they're so stupid. It's just like, really? 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 How dumb? How dumb are you? This was apparently considered blasphemous by the Catholic employees who downed tools and refused to have anything to do with the cursed vessel. Could it have been true that despite the reassurances of Captain Smith that God really did sink the Titanic? Yes. Wait, no. I mean no. It turns out the real hull number of the ship was 401, which looks a bit like 104 in a mirror. Besides, all Catholic workers had been driven out of Harland & Wolff by the close of the 19th century, and the company exclusively employed Protestant workers during the construction of the Titanic. Okay, whatever. It's just such nonsense. Really, they could do that in the past, right? It's weird. The British steamship SS Californian was reportedly the closest ship in the area during the sinking of the Titanic, and is now best remembered as the ship that did practically nothing at all to help, although it's debatable whether this had any real impact on the outcome or the number of lives lost. But could there have been a mysterious third vessel in between the Titanic and the Californian? Several survivors, including both crew members and passengers, later reported that as the ship was sinking, they saw searchlights from what they hoped was a rescue craft. However, the light faded and the source seemed to disappear into the horizon. It was originally believed that this light must have been coming from the Californian, but the captain of the vessel declared that it definitely wasn't coming from his ship, and he also seemed convinced that there was a third vessel lurking in the waters. One theory is that the light was coming from the Norwegian seal hunting ship Samson, which is operating illegally in the area. This doesn't sound like that unreasonable. So far, everything we've had in this episode over the last hour has just been like, what the f***? This is insane. This is insane. This is insane. Why would anyone believe this? What's wrong with you? You need to have your head checked. And this is like, okay, this seems quite reasonable so far. The crew of the Samson must have figured out that the Titanic was in trouble, but instead of attempting a rescue, they scarpered from the scene in fear of being caught seal bothering. This seems reasonable. However, records show that Samson was actually undergoing major repair work in Iceland at the time. And when you find that out, you're like, okay, mystery solved. It wasn't them. Even if the records aren't entirely correct, Samson is unlikely to have been anywhere near the Titanic. A more disturbing theory is that the mystery third vessel was directly responsible for the sinking. Oh no! Some have speculated that the Titanic was hit by torpedoes from a German U-boat, which briefly rose to the surface to assess the damage before making a hasty exit from the scene. Some of the survivors even testified at a US Senate inquiry panel that the brush with the iceberg felt so minor that they didn't even feel the slightest impact. And yet they heard explosions and worrying noises emanating from the bowels of the ship long after the iceberg collision, suggesting the Titanic may have later been targeted by the German submarine. Just 3 years later, a German U-boat would indeed sink the British ocean liner, the Lusitania, resulting in the loss of 1,198 lives, and this fanned more steam into the theory. So far, so reasonable. Let's see how this gets absolutely crushed, because obviously it's not a mainstream accepted theory today. But a lot can happen in the space of 3 years. Say, just for example, the World War. Germany was, it was 1912. The Great War was 1918 to something? Germany was not at war with Britain in 1912 and would no reason to launch a surprise ninja attack on a commercial liner, and no evidence of a torpedo strike has ever been found on the remains of the Titanic's hull. I suspect that the disorientated passengers may have heard all sorts of noises and felt all sorts of sensations after colliding with an iceberg. Yeah, no shit, because their massive ship is sinking. There's gonna be lots of sounds. Crazy. I've seen Titanic.
Was that a fart? I don't know. I can taste it.
But we've yet to see any evidence that there was ever a third vessel bobbing around near the tragic scene. Moving on to a slightly more sensible theory, some have suggested that the Titanic was carrying the remains of an Egyptian mummy which placed a curse on the ship. Danny, this is the least sensible one other than the God thing. And even then I find this more silly somehow, even though at least mummies are real, curses are not. Okay, so we won't spend too much time on this one, although the Washington Post seems strangely obsessed with the idea at the time. As in the Washington Post? That's a broadsheet, right? That's not the New York Post. That's a sensible newspaper that's owned by Jeff Bezos and Amazon, right? Apparently, this haunted mummified princess had been evacuated from Egypt and shipped across to England during the early 20th century, after which it got busy slapping curses on everyone and leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Ow! My back. The Brits eventually got pissed off with the naughty mummy and palmed it off to an American archaeologist who decided to take it to New York via the Titanic, thereby cursing the majority of the passengers to a watery grave. Sounds real! In fact, this was just an extension of an entirely fictional ghost story cooked up by two Englishmen at the turn of the century, and there was no record of a mummy on the Titanic's cargo list. Besides, haunted, mummified princesses are notoriously afraid of water and would never agree to such a trip in the first place. But could the disaster have been planned all along by the man at the very top of the crow's nest? That man would be J.P. Morgan, the American millionaire banker who owns the International Mercantile Marine Company, which in turn owned the Titanic's operator White Star Line. See, this is already much more believable. Like the one before the mummy one. It's like, well, okay, because it's actually based in something that could be real. J.P. Morgan had naturally got his own ticket to sail on the ship's maiden voyage, and he wouldn't be the only millionaire on board the vessel. Not surprising, really, as those tickets didn't come cheap. Yeah, the first-class tickets on the Titanic were mad expensive when you adjust for inflation. It's like, holy shit, okay. I feel like it was like tens of thousands of dollars.
It's like $1 or something.
Three other millionaires who sadly didn't enjoy the full value of their Titanic tickets were Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidore Straus, and Jacob Astor. But here's the thing, J.P. Morgan was a keen supporter of the proposed creation of a Federal Reserve Bank, which would in fact be formed in 1913, just 1 year after the Titanic sank. But it was believed that the other trio of highly influential millionaires were fierce opponents of the Federal Reserve Bank and could potentially throw a spanner in the works for J.P. Morgan if they could somehow be thrown out of the picture, JP Morgan's plans would sail a lot more smoothly. Have we very recently covered this? Sometimes, because now it's more than Danny who writes on Brave Place, I feel like we did a conspiracy theory video, this definitely came up, and I know the answer, but it's just a small fraction of this video. So we'll just carry on regardless. And to get this, right at the 11th hour, JP Morgan mysteriously cancelled his spot on the Titanic, choosing not to sail on the doomed craft after all. The conspiracy theory, which had been knocking around for decades, but was quite recently given a new lease of life courtesy of those crackpots at QAnon, is that JP Morgan lured his 3 millionaire rivals on board a ship which he knew beforehand was destined to sink, putting an end to the nuisance obstacles that were getting in his way. How exactly he'd go about this is the subject of debate. One theory is that he ensured the ship was carrying the wrong flares, whilst a more outlandish theory suggests that the decks of the vessel were electromagnetically sealed to trap passengers in the event of an accident. QAnon, what are you up to? However he went about it, his last-minute cancellation ensured his own survival, whilst Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, and Jacob Astor all perished in the disaster. Is this like Guggenheim and Strauss? And Astor? I know Jacob Astor. I don't like Guggenheim is the big museum or art gallery or something. Strauss is like, is he the Levi's jeans, like heir or something? Or isn't there a Strauss? They're not guitars. Are they violins? Instruments of some kind? Strauss instruments or composers? So if there's something in music, Strauss, right? He's a composer. He's not a violin maker. What the fuck, Whistle? All perished in the disaster, and the Federal Reserve Bank was formed less than a year later. Of course, this is all hogwash. JP Morgan had a perfectly good reason for cancelling his trip following last-minute problems in shipping his art collection to New York, which required his urgent attention. The idea that Guggenheim, Strauss, and Astor opposed the forming of the Federal Reserve Bank also appeals to be a complete myth. Neither Guggenheim nor Astor had ever publicly expressed an opinion about it, while Strauss actually had shown strong support for the idea. But perhaps the biggest issue with this conspiracy theory is that it just sounds so utterly balmy. Say for a moment that JP Morgan really did want to murder 3 millionaire rivals on the grounds they may have somehow stopped the forming of the Federal Reserve Bank. He would surely have dreamed up a slightly more practical method than inviting them on board his major new investment and instructing his kamikaze captain to hit a random iceberg, ensuring that the trio were one of the 1,514 people who perished from the crew of 2,224. As far as murder plots goes, this one was in need of a few tweaks. So that just leaves us with the only plausible theory left on the ominously sliding tables. It was obviously all just an insurance scam, wasn't it? The Titanic had an older sister which sailed, I've heard of this one where they swapped them round, right? Under the name RMS Olympic, but it had run into a spot of trouble shortly before the Titanic sank. Within just a couple of months of its maiden voyage, the Olympic had already been involved in 2 serious collisions which had caused considerable structural damage to the vessel. It seems that White Star Line didn't have much luck with these ocean liners. They may have been just better off giving up and rebranding themselves as White Star Marine Diving Expeditions. It's alleged that the damage to the Olympic was far greater than the company ever let on, and they couldn't make an insurance claim as the ship itself was at fault for the collision. So White Star came up with a cunning plan. They would disguise the knackered ship as the new heavily insured Titanic and sink it on its supposed maiden voyage in what would appear to be a random accident. The 2 vessels were supposedly pretty similar, so the deception would largely just involve a couple of minor design changes and swapping out a few plaques and nameplates. See, I know this one, so I know that it's not real. But it does sound quite reasonable, doesn't it? Like, on the face of things, you'd be like, we should look into that. If I was the insurance company, I'd be like, we're going to check that pretty thoroughly, White Star Line. We're going to make sure that you didn't swap those ships because that's real expensive for us to pay out. The real Titanic could then look forward to future voyages under the name of the miraculously repaired Olympic, whilst the real battered and bruised Olympic would be generating millions of dollars in insurance claims under the name of Titanic from its resting place at the bottom of the ocean. Titanic truthers point out a thing, is it? Good. That the Olympic had 16 portholes, whilst photographs of the Titanic under construction show that it only had 14 portholes, yet the Titanic had mysteriously gained 2 additional portholes after the wreckage was examined. So there we have it! The sinking of the Titanic was just a dodgy insurance scam, and the ship never sank at all. Sport skeptics there pointed out that endangering the lives of over 2,000 people would again be a pretty complicated and long-winded way of picking up an insurance payout. We might also want to consider that the sinking of any vessel would have been absolutely disastrous PR for an ocean liner business, and the loss of confidence in the company would far outweigh the benefits of any insurance claim. Yeah, which I didn't think about, which is blindingly obvious when you think about it, isn't it? Especially if you were like, it's unsinkable. No one's ever going to trust you again. And it seems that the Titanic wasn't that heavily insured anyway. At best, White Star Line may have recouped 2/3 of the value of the ship. The similarities between the vessels were massively overplayed, and it would have taken a major overhaul to fool anyone into thinking that the Olympic was the Titanic. As for those 2 extra portholes, it was later evidence that they had been added to the real Titanic before the doomed voyage. So, they must have been added. And that's exactly what happened. The damage to the real Olympic was also overstated, and the ship was eventually patched up for a fairly reasonable $200,000. And the later examinations of both the Titanic wreckage and the dismantled Olympic, which was taken apart in 1936, have yet to reveal a single fragment of evidence that either ship was in disguise. British historian Gareth Russell notes that if White Star really did plan a dodgy switch to claim on the insurance, it would have been slightly easier just to set the supposed Titanic on fire while docked, instead of sending it out to sea full of thousands of people and aiming for the nearest iceberg. In his words, the theory is so painfully ridiculous that one can only lament the thousands of trees which lost their lives to revive the paper on which it has been articulated. Well said. I'm just waiting for the day when it's finally revealed that the Titanic really did have a hull number which read no Pope when held up in a mirror, and those Catholic employees who never worked at the Belfast shipyard are proven to have been right all along. Never happening, Danny.
Oh, a man can dream, though. A man can dream.
Global warming. It's perhaps not too surprising that it took most people a little while to get on board with the idea of climate change. If we went back in time and tried telling the people of the 1950s that the human race are adding heat-trapping gases to the atmosphere and catastrophically changing the climate patterns that all living creatures rely upon, I suspect that most of them would scoff at the very notion and go back to gleefully burning some more tires in their backyard. Yeah, the past is crazy. What a scene that always stuck with me from Mad Men was where the Don Draper and his family are out for a picnic. They're just in some nice nature, having a good time. And then just before they leave, Don just gets up and there's all this trash and stuff that they've had from their picnic, and he just shakes off the blanket into nature and folds it up. And it's just yeah, done. We'll just leave all that here. Just so nonchalantly, oh, that was just normal. And then they get back in their car drunk without seatbelts. The past was fucking crazy. But by the time you get to the 21st century, you'd have hoped that some of the world's more influential figures might have cottoned on to the fact that there's pretty much a 100% consensus amongst scientists that global warming is very much real and not just a conspiracy thrown about by tree huggers. It does amaze me how many people are I'm not really sure about this. And it's you don't have to be sure, just listen to the scientists. It's not complicated. There'll be people in the comments being well, I'm not sure. It's shut up. You don't know more than scientists. The weird thing about this one is that there is a genuine conspiracy at work here, but the victims of the conspiracy are the conspiracy theorists who've been fooled into believing that climate change is the conspiracy. Outspoken UK broadcaster and former Top Gear host Jeremy Clarkson has very recently, and perhaps very reluctantly, admitted that there might just be something to climate change. But it took him a long time to reach that point. Just a few years back, he was using his column in the Sunday Times to come out with statements such as this: science fiction is thriving, although today it's all being written by global warming enthusiasts. Really? I always thought Jeremy Clarkson's quite a rational person. A lot of his comedy kind of comes from rationality. And making fun of people who believe silly things. I'd have thought he'd kind of have noted this a little bit sooner. He also noted every time they show a climate change program on TV, 42 people will watch, 8 million will watch Top Gear. And he didn't, but that's because Top Gear's interesting and climate change, as important as it is boring. It's boring. And he didn't have much time for Greta Thunberg either, pointing out when a teenage girl has an angry, tearful strop, most parents just send them to their rooms until they've calmed down. Former rock guitarist and modern-day self-proclaimed madman Ted Nugent has long claimed that global warming is a fraud largely perpetrated by Al Gore, who is apparently a doomsday zealot and a master of scam. What's Al Gore gaining out of this, though? You gotta, what's he getting out of this, really? But it gets even more worrying when politicians join in on the boiling fury. Former governor of Alaska and former Republican Vice President Sarah Palin. Wait, Sarah Palin was Vice President? Under Vice President? Under who? Wait, wasn't she just a candidate? Put a gun down for a few minutes in 2014 to reveal climate change is to this century what eugenics was to the last century. It's hysteria and it's a lot of junk science. And when it says discredited as eugenics, you know, a lot of people are going to look very foolish and heartless. Yes, indeed. Imagine looking as foolish as that. Yes, Sarah. Imagine looking as foolish as that, Sarah. I wonder what looking as foolish as that would look like, Sarah. You fucking idiot. And then, of course, there's Donald Trump. Although he noticeably calmed down a little on the climate change denial after he became president. In tweets from 2012 and 2013, Trump observed, "Ice storm rolls from Texas to Tennessee. I'm in Los Angeles, and it's freezing. Global warming is a total and very expensive hoax. We should be focusing on beautiful, clean air and not on wasteful and very expensive global warming bullshit." Okay, fine. So focus on clean air. It's going to get the same result. China and others are hurting our air. It's true. These last two statements are true. Focus on clean air, and China is also hurting the air. It's true. And true, just cool. But what? Gonna get the same results.
Very valuable. I love China. In Trump Tower. I love China.
China. Just want to make that clear. China.
He continues, the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make US manufacturing non-competitive. That doesn't make a lot of sense, seeing as China are absolutely massive polluters and contributors to global warming. Trump's last point is interesting, as I've often wondered about the point of a perceived climate change conspiracy. Why would anyone benefit from telling us to drive more eco-friendly vehicles and to reuse plastic carrier bags if there was no genuine benefit to the planet? Well, I think about oil companies for one. Like, Shell's probably not going to be too happy if everyone just suddenly doesn't use oil anymore. Trump seemed to think that countries such as China, Japan, and India were laughing at the stupidity of the West as we spend a fortune on cleaning up our manufacturing processes while they just set everything on fire and undercut our prices because they don't even attempt to participate in any potentially expensive eco-friendly practices. Others have suggested that the climate change conspiracy is just a marketing tool for the promotion of nuclear power, which emits significantly lower greenhouse gas carbon dioxide. Significantly lower? I believe it emits none. Where's the carbon monoxide coming from in nuclear? Maybe there's some, but it's got to be negligible, surely. It'd be like, okay, there's a truck that took the uranium to like a nuclear plant. But a more popular theory suggests that scientists are continually manipulating the data in a bid to keep research funds flowing into their institutions. Oh, please. It's just silly. They all know it's a load of bollocks, but they try to keep up the pretense that climate change is real, partly to keep themselves in jobs and partly because they'd be made to look a bit silly if the truth was revealed after everyone had already spent so much on renewable energies. I don't know. I know a scientist. I know a few scientists. And whenever I talk to them, and they're like, yeah, I spent years doing this research and it turned out that I was wrong. And then they move on to new research. They're not like, oh, better keep perpetuating that lie. Because at some point, it's like, oh yeah, I had this theory. And it turns out it was wrong. And I spent my entire master's degree and doctorate doing that. And it turns out I was wrong. It's fine. It's like, they're generally like, okay, moving on. Next thing. However, if we're talking about revealing the truth, we need to look at how the climate change conspiracy was itself fueled by a genuine corporate conspiracy to fool theorists into believing that global warming was a conspiracy. It turns out that energy companies weren't mad keen on the idea of global warming evolving into a trending topic, and some of them embarked upon a lavishly funded campaign to spread misinformation on climate change and persuade citizens that they were being lied to by foolish scientists who didn't know their asses from their elbows. In 2005 alone, the UK Royal Society discovered that ExxonMobil had given away $2.9 million to a list of 39 groups whose sole purpose was to misrepresent the science of climate change by outright denial of the evidence. That is mental. You should be getting a fat old fine, in my opinion, ExxonMobil. In my opinion, allegedly. A later analysis conducted by The Carbon Brief in 2011 revealed that 9 out of 10 of the most prolific authors to constantly deny the reality of climate change had close financial ties to ExxonMobil. Or they did they? What a coincidence! Meanwhile, Greenpeace reckon that the Coke Industries have forked out no less than $50 million over a 50-year period on spreading doubts over the science of climate change. That actually doesn't sound $1 million a year. It's Coke Industries. It's not that much. Like, not Coca-Cola. K-O-C-H is pronounced Coke, right? Like Koch. Koch is pronounced Coke. Have I got that right?
Cock.
It's a bit like when the tobacco companies spent millions of dollars on trying to convince customers that regularly inhaling smoke into your lungs was in absolutely no way connected to lung cancer. It's just a big coincidence. And weirdly enough, the world's biggest tobacco company was at the heart of this conspiracy too. What? After Philip Morris International were forced by law in 1998 to release internal documents during the major class action against a chain of tobacco companies, it was discovered that they had hired the public relations company APCO to adopt an unusual strategy for persuading customers that the alleged dangers of passive smoking were just a hoax. The strategy involved making out that passive smoking was just yet another example of paranoid government overregulation. Philip Morris set about launching websites and publishing mainstream articles which urged angry citizens to fight any overregulation based on junk science, and this included the government-spread lies over the dangers of pesticides, passive smoking, and of course climate change. You are okay? You're like an evil villain, in my opinion.
Target acquired.
One of the websites, junkscience.com, which received $30,000 worth of funding from Philip Morris's generous friends over at ExxonMobil, turned out to be a massive hit as it dared to compare clueless hippie environmentalists with communists, Nazis, and terrorists. It's hard to underestimate the powerful negative effect this campaign had on convincing big chunks of the population, including politicians and lawmakers, that no immediate action was required to tackle climate change. Why has no one approached me? Come on, ExxonMobil. Where's my money? Be like, hey, Facts Boy, can you make some videos about how smoking's awesome and cars are good for the environment? And I'll be like, $1 million. No, I wouldn't do it because I have ethics. I wouldn't do that for $1 million. Because one, because it's ethically repugnant. And two, because when people are like, oh, Simon took $1 million from ExxonMobil, no one's ever going to believe me again. But at least I have $1 million. That's cool. Even when the Philip Morris-funded reports into the so-called junk science were comprehensively debunked by people who knew what they were talking about, the very same articles would continue to get wheeled out for decades to follow as concrete evidence that climate change was a scam. I'm starting to think that Philip Morris may have had something against humanity in general. Yeah, you might think that, might you, Danny? In our opinion. Not content with killing off half the population with cancer sticks, in Danny's it's like well established. They were now waging a propaganda war against the very planet on which they were raking in millions of dollars. Thankfully, such devious and damaging corporate campaigns are now largely confined to the recent history books, although climate change denial hasn't completely disappeared. It might be a bit more helpful if some of the eco-warriors themselves learned to practice what they preached. I know where we're going with this. It's like, peace and love, everybody. Don't forget, switch to electric. And I'm going to go give this same speech across the country. And yes, I'm traveling private. Leonardo DiCaprio picked up a Green Award in New York in 2016, but flew over 8,000 miles in a private jet to pick up the damn thing. Meanwhile, Prince Harry and Princess Meghan Markle have regularly flown around the globe on private jets to lecture the world on climate change. It's rich irony, isn't it? The BBC have estimated that just 2 of those many flights would have produced 6 times more emissions than the average Brit would produce in a whole year. It could be argued that influential figures should be allowed to leave a bigger carbon footprint if they're helping to spread an important global message for the greater good. Besides, Prince Harry and Princess Meghan are unlikely to fancy squeezing themselves onto an EasyJet flight with the peasants. Which is also fine. It's gonna, when you're that famous, it's going to be very unpleasant. Because just can deal with it. This is the thing. Mate. Well, they didn't make this choice, though. I think that's different. Like Leonardo DiCaprio, in many ways, he got himself into it. Whereas Harry, he's kind of like, he was, as insane as it is, he was born into it. So I kind of cut him a little bit of slack.
Oh, really? Please.
Boo.
But critics have pointed out that it also creates an unhelpful impression that these hypocritical celebrities feel that they're far too superior to follow their own advice. It might prove more fruitful if they instead chose to lead by example. Even Greta Thunberg is at it. Oh, and the young Swedish activist set sail from Monaco to New York to attend a UN climate summit in 2019. She made a big fuss about traveling in a carbon-neutral yacht, as this would naturally be kinder to the environment. The only problem is that after she landed in New York, a couple of other people flew in by jet to help take the yacht back to Europe. Greta's trip ended up generating more carbon emissions than if she'd just chosen to fly on a plane like a normal person. But for Greta, that might have seemed just a little too uncool for a global warming activist. It is crazy, like nowadays when I book a flight, it tells me how much carbon dioxide is being emitted. It's like tons. And you're like, oh my God, how? Tons of carbon, and it's a gas. Imagine how much that is. God damn, it makes me feel bad. But then I realize I have to go somewhere, so I book it regardless. And it's like, okay, well, what do you want me to do about it? Like, I'm obviously on this website to book a flight to this destination. Do you just like me feeling like a piece of shit? You like me not taking a holiday? Do you like me not traveling? Like, f off. Why? You'd be like, oh yeah, well, okay, this flight does burn 2 tons of carbon dioxide, or it does emit 2 tons of carbon dioxide. Okay, I won't take it then. That never happens. The Black Knight satellite. Hiding somewhere in the near polar orbit of the Earth, the Black Knight satellite is waiting to make its next move. The existence of this mysterious alien artifact, okay, we already know it's nonsense then, presumably a satellite, has been covered up by years by NASA, and that's despite claims that the Black Knight has been silently brooding over the Earth for a good 13,000 years, and occasionally attempts to make contact with mankind. It's doing a bit of a job then, isn't it? But what does it want with us? Was it secretly destroyed by NASA in 2017? And why won't any government admit that it ever existed in the first place? Well, all I can say is do your own research. No, wait a minute, I've already done the research. I might as well share it with you whilst I'm here. Imagine if you just ended the video on, well, do your own research. This has been an episode of... No, obviously you're here for facts and knowledge and also some nonsense. Let's carry on. The Black Knight was possibly first detected by Serbian scientist and inventor Nikola Tesla. He always gets his way into conspiracy theories, doesn't he? Just like the Jews in 1899. It's amazing, like, lack of mention of Jews in today's video about conspiracy theories. They usually mentioned somewhere. Let's get some anti-Semitism in there. While he was beavering away on a wireless power project in Colorado, he told the Albany Telegram, I have a deep conviction that highly intelligent beings exist on Mars. I have perfected a wireless receiver of extraordinary sensitiveness far beyond anything known, and I caught signals which I interpreted as meaning 1, 2, 3, 4. I believe the Martians use numbers for communication because numbers are universal. He later expanded to Collier's Weekly in 1901. The changes I noted were taking place periodically, and with such a clear suggestion of number and order that they were not traceable to any cause then known to me. The feeling is constantly growing on me that I have been the first to hear the greeting of one planet to another. It's blindingly obvious that Tesla had picked up a transmission from the Black Knight satellite, although strangely, it's not something he ever pursued again. Is this real? Did Tesla really say that? He wasn't the only one, though. In 1928, the amateur radio operator Jørgen Hals stumbled across something quite peculiar. As he transmitted radio signals from his home in Oslo, Norway, he found that the signals were bouncing right back at him a few moments later. Jørgen was convinced that aliens were responsible for returning his signals back to him in sort of an intergalactic game of ping pong. Wait, gets reflected off the atmosphere, right? Isn't that how, like, long-distance radio works? It, like, bounces up and down and does shit. That's what's happening to you, Jørgen. But he couldn't have known at the time that it was surely the Black Knight. But much later in 1973, the Scottish author Duncan Lunan closely analysed Jørgen's findings and concluded that the delay times in these alien echoes could actually be converted into star charts and diagrams which represented the attempted transmission of messages from an alien probe which had been hiding near the moon for the best part of 13,000 years. Oh my god, and now we know! The Black Knight was again picked up in 1954 by UFO researcher Donald Keyhoe, who made headlines as he reported the discovery of 2 satellites orbiting the Earth during a time when neither America nor the Soviet Union had the technology to launch such a thing. So it's possible that the Black Knight had a sister satellite. Fast forward just a few years to 1960, and both the US and the Soviets now had the ability to launch satellites into orbit, but the appearance of an unidentified satellite in polar orbit was causing confusion and a little panic as Time magazine reported that neither side was admitting ownership. But the biggest proof of existence of the Black Knight finally emerged in 1998 when NASA jolly well went and catalogued an image of it during the STS-88 mission and made it available for all to see. Oh, they were typically sneaky about it. Sneaky NASA, always hiding from us and not releasing it. They gave it the item number STS-088-724-66 and captioned it as nothing more suspicious than a lump of space debris. But we followers of the Black Knight knew exactly what we were looking at when we first examined this image of the mysterious black object lurking over the Earth. This was the exact same alien satellite that had first been picked up by Nikola Tesla in 1899 before it was later observed by the likes of Norwegian amateur radio operator and the UFO researcher. Some have speculated that the Black Knight is no longer there, as it was finally shot down by the Illuminati in 2007 when nobody was looking.
'Tis but a scratch. A scratch?
Why does anyone take this seriously? It really boggles the mind, doesn't it? But why won't the world governments or space agencies admit that it ever existed? The Black Knight deniers, which will officially be recognized as a hate crime in decades to come, have tried to make out that the conspiracy is just a jumbled up conflation of entirely independent events which have been crudely lumped together as an explanation for anything slightly odd taking place in the skies. It's hard to know for sure exactly what Nikola Tesla was waffling on about, and it's admittedly very strange that he apparently communicated with an alien life form, but then couldn't be bothered to have another go. It could have been the case that Tesla was actually tuning into pulsars, spinning neutron stars that emit rhythmic signals, although we didn't develop the technology to detect pulsars until 1968. It's perhaps more likely that the signals were simply emanating from the Earth. He's like, I hear people saying 1, 2, 3, 4. It must be Mars. or, guess what? Something on Earth. Black Knight deniers have pointed out that the signals bouncing back to Jorgen Hulls were actually just long-delayed echoes, which are audible just under 3 seconds after a radio transmission. There you go. The Scottish author who later analysed the initial findings and drew up star charts and diagrams was a science fiction writer. Oh, he was he? Well, so was all the other guys, because it's not real. Rather than say an astronomer, he later admitted that his methods were deeply unscientific and he had made outright errors in his own analysis. What? Just you're a science fiction writer. You don't make outright errors, you make up. The UFO researcher from 1954 had a new book on UFOs out at the time that he reported his 2 satellites, so it's not out of the question that he may have been talking absolute bollocks to help get his name propelled into the papers to drum up a few more sales. And once again, money being an important motivator. What a shock and surprise! The satellite, reported in 1960 by Time magazine, was later revealed to be a broken chunk of the early US spy satellite Discoverer 8, which had burned up on re-entry during the same year. But what about that photograph from NASA? It's space debris. It's fucking space debris. Of course it's space debris. Well, the agency would have you believe that it was a thermal blanket. Space debris. During the STS-88 mission, the astronauts embarked upon spacewalks in which thermal blankets or covers were placed over trunnion pins. One of the blankets broke loose and drifted off into space, and this moment was apparently captured on video footage alongside the subsequent photograph of the runaway blanket that was captioned as space debris. It wasn't actually shot down in 2017 by the Illuminati. Shocking, we know. It simply burned up a few days later when it fell from orbit. A likely tale whipped up by a crooked institution which still hasn't admitted that it was infiltrated by communist aliens in 1958. Do they think we're stupid? Yes. When the truth of the Black Knight satellite inevitably emerges, we devoted pursuers of the facts will be making loud triumphant noises that will exceed even the deafening ding of the biggest and most boisterous party to ever be held in Ong's Hat. Enjoy the rest of your day, comrades. That was a long one, guys. Long one. I'm going to have some lunch. I'm super hungry. Strong end to the video there, Fact Boy. Thanks for watching.